Alright YouTube, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and today we are here to discuss Fort Condor. And why we're talking about Fort Condor today is because, of course, with some of the recent information we got, we learned that the character Polk, within the Intermission / Yuffie DLC, is a big fan of the Fort Condor board game. For some reason, Fort Condor is a board game within the Remake universe. And to any fan of the original FF7, like, seeing that, it's kind of a WTF moment, because, like, what does that mean? Fort Condor is a board game that you play within FF7 Remake, apparently. It's something like Monopoly or some shit in our world. It's like, what does that mean? Does Fort Condor even exist anymore in the Remake timeline? Is it still a location we're going to get to see and visit? Do we go there? Does it still have the tower defense minigame? Or we're still going to go there in the main story to get a huge material? Like, there's a lot of questions here, man. Now, the idea of them making this location no longer integral to the FF7 story wouldn't really be surprising. When it came to the original FF7, this location, Fort Condor, is like 99% optional. You come here for one part of the story to get a huge material, and you don't even have to get it. You can lose, like, the quest here, so to speak, and the story will continue. You won't get, like, a game over screen or something. So what they could do when it comes to the remake story, given that this is the same story but different, it's kind of like a sequel, but also like an alternate timeline or something is what it seems like. Maybe Shinra's already got the huge materia from this location. The original FF7, they already had one, and they're chasing the other three in the world. And maybe with the remake timeline, they're already going to have two. And maybe one of the huge materials that they do or don't have, depending, of course, is what Yuffie is after. Because we know she's after some sort of like really powerful materia within the Intermission DLC. And getting rid of the huge material within the Fort Condor reactor gets rid of this location being technically necessary when it comes to the FF7 story. A lot of people aren't fans of this. Like, a lot of people are not fans of Fort Condor and the minigame that's here. It's never forced upon you other than the one time in the story, so I don't think it's like that big of a deal. You can skip it entirely on a playthrough outside of the one story segment. And honestly, after looking over like articles and discussions recently of like the Fort Condor segment, ever since this like board game thing came out, it doesn't really make sense that Shinra could not acquire it, because, like, how long have the people of Fort Condor been fighting off Shinra until our group comes along? Like, how do they have the funds to even be able to do that, right? Like, Shinra has all the money in the goddamn world. They run the entire world. They can hire whoever, whenever, however much they want to hire them for. Obviously, it makes sense whenever our characters come along, we're the heroes, we defeat Shinra. Like, if the tower defense minigame fails, then they come to the top of the tower and we fight them as our group. And obviously, we're going to defeat them because, again, we're the good guys. But how long is this struggle between Fort Condor and Shinra going on for? Because they should have lost a long time ago. Something kind of interesting that I'd seen Maximilian do theorize with his video where he talked about the new information is that maybe like his big brain idea, I think is what he said, is that the board game is based off like a story people had heard about this phoenix on top of a Mako reactor somewhere out there in the world. But of course, the idea would be that, it's just a story. It's just a board game. It's just a myth or whatever the case. But when we get to Fort Condor, we're obviously going to see that it is true. The idea that he had also that I've seen other people discuss as well is that maybe like the board game itself is the minigame, the Fort Condor minigame. It's how you do the Fort Condor tower defense minigame. If you want to, maybe you can play it with like random characters within the world, or maybe within this DLC or something. I don't know. Kind of rolling with the idea of this board game being based on a story, this is, of course, a board game within the slums, which the slums are within Midgar. Maybe the board game itself is created by Shinra to kind of spin the narrative that it is just all a story, right? There's no actual Phoenix or Mako reactor or whatever out there. Like, that doesn't exist. It's just a board game. Or it could also be a board game based on Shinra's conquest of Fort Condor. Now, I don't know what the objective of the board game would be. Maybe you try to get your piece to the middle of the board where you get the special material, which could be, of course, alluding to Shinra acquiring the huge material. Just pure off the top of my head, random speculation. I have no idea. Who knows how this board game would be played in-universe. Now, as for the discussion and the idea of them cutting the Fort Condor tower defense minigame entirely, it probably pleased more people than it would piss off, and it hurts me to say that because I'm a fan of it, dude. I've said that before in videos, I'll continue to say that. When it came to me being a younger kid playing FF7, this is a place I'd come to just to like burn some time. Just Gold Saucer, like a lot of the minigames of Gold Saucer aren't really that fun except for like the battle arena. You can maybe sink a bit of time into like the snowboarding minigame, which I was never that much of a fan of. It was fun, like kind of conceptually, just a snowboard with Cloud, but it really isn't that fun to actually play. The G-Bike one is kind of fun, and the submarine one was, I guess you could put a little bit of time into. Other than that, all the other mini games around Gold Saucer aren't really that fun. So for me, the Battle Arena and Fort Condor were the only ones I ever really put a lot of time into. And I could see them modernizing this into like an actual fun tower defense minigame that you could sink a lot of time into. Like something you can actually level up and progress in, and maybe you unlock different troops, maybe you can level up the different troops that you can use and the different traps and all that stuff that you know from the original game. Maybe there's new stuff too. New monsters to fight, new troops to use, and all that other shit. I do miss the days of like Final Fantasy games having really solid mini games that you could, if you want to take a break from the main story and just sink some hours into, you can. Like the perfect example for me that I like to always give is Blitzball. Blitzball is something that you could put probably just as much, if not more time into than you did the actual story and playing of Final Fantasy X. From leveling up your players to unlocking moves to participate in tournaments, recruiting other players, unlocking unique items and overdrives for Waka and stuff like that. There's so much you can do with Blitzball. That is such a unique minigame that I just haven't experienced in other Final Fantasy games. Another good example of a minigame, at least in my opinion, comes from both Final Fantasy VIII and IX, which is Triple Triad and Tetramaster, respectively. Now, I think Final Fantasy IX's take on the card game was a little bit better because there's a lot more mechanics to it, and you could also like progress and level your cards, where they got stronger the more you won and beat other cards and shit. Like I thought that was a pretty cool concept. Now, to be completely honest, I'm a trading card game fan. I've been into TCG for a lot of my life, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and other shit like that. So there's probably an aspect of that makes me a fan of those mini games because of the collection aspect and the quote unquote battling each other and dueling each other and shit like that is probably part of it. But I still think that they're pretty well done. And I just hope when it comes to Remake that this is something we get at some point, whether it's this Fort Condor board game that ends up being like the tower defense mini game or something else entirely. We get some sort of like mini game or side thing we can do that we can sink a lot of time into. Actually, another one that I thought of that is conceptually pretty good, in my opinion, is the Monster Arena from Final Fantasy X as well, alongside Blitzball, where you could go around to the different areas within the world, capture the monsters, and you go back to the Monster Arena and you can fight like a really powerful monster that's usually stronger than most of the monsters within the game, most of the bosses and shit. Anyways, dudes, we're kind of rambling, kind of all over the place here towards the end of the video. It is just a discussion. It remains to be seen what exactly is going on here. There is a reason that there's a Fort Condor board game within the Intermission DLC. We're going to find that out within this DLC and probably going forward. When we get to part 2, whether or not Fort Condor is still a location we can even go to at all, whether or not it's still the same as it was in the original game, whether it's integral to the story at some point, all that's going to be found out in the future, obviously, but I'm very interested to see what's going on with this board game whenever we get the DLC in a couple months. But of course, I do want to pass off to you guys. When it comes to Fort Condor, the board game, what do you think's going on here? Because there's got to be something. Either way, my dudes, that is the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys only want to update more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, dashingdavidYT. I'm a Discord. Links to my box are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more. And nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine or leave it like Cobain.